You're listening to the B&H Photography Podcast. For over 40 years, B&H has been the professional source for photography, video, audio, and more. For your favorite gear, news, and reviews, visit us at bnh.com or download the B&H app to your iPhone or Android device. Now here's your host, Alan Weitz.
Welcome to the B&H Photography Podcast. I'm Alan Weitz, and in today's episode, John and I continue our series from the Eddie Adams Workshop with two conversations on photo editing and the working relationship between photography editors and photographers. Our first talk is with Colin Crawford, Deputy Managing Editor of Visual Journalism at the Los Angeles Times, and Nancy Andrews, former Director of Photography at the Detroit Free Press and currently Professor for Media Innovation at Reed College for Media at West Virginia University. We talked to them about what young photographers should consider about editing as they are shooting and about the differences between photographers and editors. After a break, we'll resume with Pulitzer Prize-winning photographer Michael Williamson and MaryAnne Golon, Assistant Managing Editor and Director of Photography at The Washington Post. In addition to being colleagues, MaryAnne and Michael are friends, and we'll discuss the working relationship between a photographer and an editor.
That's how I grew as a photographer. It's how I grow as an editor, listening to what everybody is saying about that work and talking about it and talking it through and dissecting a couple of photos to learn for the future shoot. So it might be your shoot, but everybody is hearing it. Mm-hmm. We're not hiding it. And when people are like, what? Well, you're talking about my work so publicly. Listen, it's a picture. Everybody is a picture editor. Everybody looks at a picture and has an opinion on it. They just might not tell you. We're telling you.
How do you treat the student photographers different than you would one of your staff photographers? Given the same scenario, maybe
I really like the public edit of that community and light table experience, even though you don't have the light table anymore. Mm-hmm. But for me, it's that we are stronger. I'm going to sound like Hillary Clinton here. We're stronger together, but we are stronger together. We are better as a team. People tend to think of photography as very individual, and it is in a certain way. It depends on the endurance and the tenacity and the vision of that individual photographer. But I think any photographer or picture editor will tell you here, it also depends on their colleagues, that they are a product of people who have shown them. I mean, I am a product of what all the experiences that I had here from 88 to every newspaper I've ever worked at. I'm a product from judging contests with Colin, even though I've never worked directly with Colin. We judged the Pulitzer together. Mm-hmm. We've done these other things. And so, I learn from each one of those things. You learn if you listen.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's what's really key. I think what is key about this workshop is it's led by photographers. So this is a situation where the people that are normally in charge, which would be your editors, are the ones that are, sort of secondary. And actually, I really try to make the photographers take that responsibility. And most of them do, because it's a workshop about photography led by photographers. But I think the editing process is really important. I think a lot of younger people, younger photographers don't get the feedback. And I think at our place, that's, we don't probably even do as much as I would like us to. But I think what's really important is we have strong picture editors, especially like my projects editors and people like that really can take photographers to another level. And some photographers are pretty decent self-editors. Some are horrible. And the conversations about photography that take place, and again, it'll happen amongst my staff photographers when they're sitting around the table doing their daily work. But then I think what's really important is like the feedback from editors about how you did, or if it's a long-term story, what you got, what you didn't get, where you need to go next, how we're going to marry words and pictures together, how we're going to do a print edit versus an online edit and bring multimedia components and then talk about a social media plan and all these other things. And I think that editing is what really makes the work better. I think it's much better than just working in a vacuum as a lone photographer.
Are you a little softer on the students here than you would be, let's say, on a rookie staff member?
I don't think so. I don't, unlike some editors that like to hear themselves bark a lot, I try not to do that. I try to keep it sort of, positive about, how this can be better, what you did well, but here's how you could be better versus what you failed at, and same thing, look, everybody fails. We all do it. And so that's even whether it's a 30-year staff photographer or a rookie photographer, as long as you're not doing it consistently or purposefully or, or just like basically I don't want to say blowing off an assignment, but blowing off an assignment. So if you're never going to get in trouble just for failing, but it's going to be sort of a lack of effort where you're, or whether here or back at the times where you're going to get in trouble.
Yeah, so, did you fail forward? Did you
right.
were you in a movement going forward and it didn't work, but you tried all these things. Oh, I tried this blur and flash, or I tried to crank the ISO up to as high as it would go, or I did this. And if none of them worked, but you tried all those things.
Since you both have been photographers and editors, can you talk about the differences, personality differences? What personality traits make a good photographer? What make a good editor?
I mean, I think what makes a good photographer, I mean, some of it's a gift. It's just literally a gift. And others, it's incredibly hard work and talent and research and things like that. It's an eye. It's how you can, how you can put yourself in incredibly awkward situations over and over that you would never be in and succeed. And that you succeed by getting in with people. You succeed by being a fly on the wall. You succeed by, what I love about visual journalism and what I'd give, other journalists at my paper grief about sometimes is like they can write a great story from the telephone. They can write a great story about something that happened 8 years ago, and they often do. And my guys have to live it. They have to see it. They have to breathe. And one of the great, there was a great line. We've had massive brush fires in California. We seem to always do, but it was a few years ago when thousands of homes had burned. And a reporter comes back to me, and this is late in the evening. He goes, he's kind of like out of breath. He goes, you're photographers. They're crazy. And I'm like, oh, great. What did they do now? And he goes, no, they're crazy. I go, yeah, I know that, but what are we talking about? He goes, no, I mean, I'm out there at the fire with them. And it starts to get intense, and it's really taken off. And I just run. I'm running down the hill. And your crazy photographer is running towards the fire. And I go, yeah, that's what they do.
That's what they do. Yeah.
So I think that's probably, that sort of tenacity and that ability to get in with people, plus, creativity and vision and all these things for photographers. With editors, it's probably, you got to have a lack of ego. You got to really try, because it's not about you anymore. It's about you making other people's work great, and you got to have patience, and it's a fair amount of parenting and things like that. And one of my things is I don't treat everybody the same, but I try to treat everybody equally, if that makes sense.
Fairly.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But I don't, the way I talk to this person versus how I talk to that person, or the way I motivate this person, it really depends on the personality. You can't just sort of have a blanket thing that everybody does this and everybody does that, and everybody puts the little box in the corner. So, we hold people to the rules, but we try to play to their strengths, and we try to, give them, the lessons. And again, we try to, you try to communicate with them on a level that you can get through and be successful.
And you have to build on that. Mm-hmm. You have, you don't want a monoculture of a photography staff. It's more like a baseball team or an orchestra or whatever. Each has different skills, and you can play to their strengths, although sometimes they have to go and do something that's not their strength just because it simply needs to be done, and they're the one there that can do it.
And that's key. And that exactly, I use the football analogy, but it's like I don't need all-star quarterbacks, because we need a team. And the team involves a lot of different types of photographers and a lot of different types of personalities and people who have different expertise too. And you want to see their vision, and you want to hire them for that vision, and then see how that fits in your team. Again, somebody will say to me, well, how do I get hired? And I'm like, it depends on what I need at that moment. Do I need a great portrait photographer? Do I need a great sports photographer? Do I need a great videographer? So it's sort of like, as you're looking at it as a team and a family, a little bit of both, how do you, and same thing, you want somebody that fits in the family too,
Right.
We've all had those.
What's a great thrill as an editor? Is there such a thing? Like, for example, I know when I look at some of my own work and even watching some of you guys
just
today.
shaking her head, yeah.
Okay. Well, let me just throw this out there. You'll give me the right answer. But I sometimes you see the first photo in a series of 10, and almost from the first or second, that somewhere in the 7th or 8th photo, there's going to be a great one, because they start good and then all of a sudden, boom, boom, boom. And I know somewhere along the line, you start to get a little excited, and then there it is, that great photo. And you're like, wow, I knew it from the first photo of that series, even though the first might not have been very good. And sometimes I get a real thrill. And do you know, maybe as you start a series, that there's going to be a great one waiting there? And
you have your fingers crossed. There's going to be a great one down there.
There may be that big letdown.
This is building. Don't go away. Don't go away. Stay with it.
Absolutely. That's the flip side.
Yeah.
So do you get like kind of visceral thrills?
So great. Yeah. Well, all right. So that to me is that's sort of the daily thrill. That's the hunt or
thrill of
the thrill of fishing. I mean, every assignment is going. David Gilkey described it as is going fishing. He goes, I don't care what kind of pond I'm in, whether I'm in a big pond or a little pond. I just want the chance to go fishing every day and catch a big fish. Catch a fish, and it can be a big fish or whatever. And so you have that when you go through that. But to me, the greatest thrill as an editor is actually with the person. Mm-hmm. That it's what that you're ultimately editing photographs and you're ultimately communicating with your readers or your audience or your community, however you want to describe it. And so the greatest thrill is when you actually do something where you feel, you and your team, that we made a difference. That's the greatest thrill. When you can do a documentary and kids get adopted as a result out of the foster care system, which is, something that that was probably one of the more proud things, or when you can do something that explains something to somebody. So you've got that level of content. But then to me, I think, though, as an editor, I guess when I actually don't look back at those things, but it's the relationships that you have with people, and that the greatest thrill is when you were able to help someone be their best and better than they even thought they could be.
How important is the relationship with the photographer? I memean, is it paramount in terms of...
Everything's about relationships, right, isn't it? Right. Ultimately, in a sense. And so it's, you have this product that you're doing. You have to have a website. You have to have a podcast. You have to do whatever. But then you also have that different life that gets in the way. Okay, maybe you have an ailing parent that you've got to take care of, and you've got all these things. You're doing all of these balances. But then at the same time, you're also trying to tap into that passion. I like to try to find out, why is this person a photographer? And so, what is it that they want to be? Because some people, they want to be a war photographer. Some people don't. They want to be a portrait photographer. Some people want to be, they only really want to do books, and I'm just a stop on their pathway. Some people love to have that front seat of history, and their only real price of admission is to turn around and show people what they saw. Some people don't want to go to that at all. They don't like crowds. They want to go where everybody else is not and show you what no one else is looking at. And if you can figure out what drives that person and how that meets your needs as a news organization or as a storyteller or what you want as a journalist, then you've got a match made in heaven. If you can do that, and then you're both just so thrilled at what you can do together.
As an editor, how has mobile imaging kind of changed your decision making when it comes to, or hasn't?
It has. I mean, I think we're something like 50 or 50 plus million uniques on our website every month, and as much as journalism has got issues and revenues are declining, I don't know that our audience has ever been bigger. And so, the great part is you have all these eyeballs that could never, I had this conversation with my students a day or so ago where, the good news is that, you used to have a photo in a print newspaper and then somebody would see it and then it gets thrown away or saved, whatever, but that's it. It's gone. You can't go back a month later. You got to go to a library and start digging around. Now you've got like stories that live forever online, stories that can reach a global audience, stories that can be told with video and audio and all these other elements. It's never been more exciting. So I think what I encourage my guys to do is always think about, again, what's the medium we're publishing in and what's the best edit for that? So an edit for the web is going to be oftentimes, they'll encompass the same photos but they'll be bigger or different or slightly better approach. So a web edit for a desktop is going to be different from a print edit for the newspaper, which might be different from an edit that we expect people to experience on mobile.
Is there anything specifics you can talk to about that? Like what would make a good photo for a mobile device or a web edit compared to?
Yeah, I mean, I think and I'm sort of prone to be, I love more photos with impact, photos that, like I'll say, look, it's a beautiful photo if it's 10 feet on a wall in a gallery. It's not a beautiful photo, 3 columns in a print newspaper or 6 inches or 5 inches on an iPhone. So you're looking for emotional images that readers can react to and see. And look, I tell my editors, when you build galleries, look at it on your phone, and it better look good because again, that's probably, that's more than half our audience is looking at it on a phone, which is weird and challenging. But again, tight, emotional, action-packed photos are kind of what you're looking for. That doesn't mean you won't do scenics and landscapes and nice travel photos too. But you got to think about how you're playing to your audience. It's the same.
You have to get in closer. Really,
Yeah.
you have to eliminate anything that's extraneous and just stay right to what the image is and the subject is.
Yeah. So I think it's probably, it's just, you got to think a lot more about how you edit and where it's going to be published.
Do photographers get it? It used to, again, with a phone, you have a limit to how much you could zoom in or whatever the case may be. Do you find that photographers are adapting to mobile devices well? In other words, they're jettisoning what they don't need as far as looking through a camera, and they're addressing just these small screens with more limited fields of view? Does it change anything?
I don't think so. I think they're still just shooting, in what I usually feel like just great images. And then, it's kind of up to us in the editing process to sort of, present them the best we can in, again, all the different platforms we publish on. I don't really feel like, again, other than maybe shooting a little bit tighter. And we were just talking about this downstairs, that it was like, nobody shoots verticals. And it's like, well, because everything's on the web. Well, or at this workshop, look, it's a slideshow. It's basically a horizontal works better. I think it's just people don't like to turn their arms, but that's just me. But you do see a lot more of a horizontal world these days, a more cinematic world as people shoot.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And,
But there's,
no, please.
but there's an element that too. You're also seeing more vertical video and more vertical, because a lot of, when I look at the different age groups and how people use their phone, someone who is over 35 is apt to turn their phone horizontal and vertical, and someone who's under 35 is apt to keep their phone locked in the vertical position.
Yeah.
So,
I finally got past that. It used to get me crazy when I'd see that, and now I just I accept it now. I didn't realize it.
yes, and so you see, the Washington Post has a vertical video player as a result. I mean, there used to be this whole campaign against that. So, I mean, Snapchat is vertical. I mean, you have, so there are these different elements.
There's something to be said about a square format image.
Yes, the square works and all, right? Yeah,
It does.
Instagram.
yeah.
Well, on mobile now, or on the web, there's space for photo essays to some degree that there maybe had been shrinking that space.
Sure.
In
Yeah.
Well,
newspapers.
and look, there are, as much as it is a difficult business to be in, there are so many more opportunities. There's so many websites. There's so many NGOs. There's so many, different organizations. And look, even, I keep trying to encourage our people to understand that my editors, it's a visual world out there, and that, it's not, as much as the written word is incredibly important and powerful for us at the Los Angeles Times, the visuals, in my mind, are certainly equally important. And every step of the way going forward, multiple levels of visual storytelling are more and more and more important. So I'm trying to sometimes get that message through to people.
I think, though, that, and I'm sorry to interrupt there.
You're not
sorry,
interrupting, please.
But one thing that I want to get in is I feel like
talk all the time.
But I feel that the digital change and the multimedia change has allowed photographers actually to have much more freedom, those that took it or choose to take it. Whereas before, maybe you had to also have a writing skill. And now you have to have a storytelling skill, and you can use your writing in terms of formulating a multimedia project. But a photographer can truly just direct and run their own project now, whereas you didn't really see that 20 years ago.
Right.
And so I think that freedom has been great. So you see that leadership with picture editors and directors and places. I mean, you all have done some incredible stuff, and I think some of those weren't as driven by the photographers.
Yeah, absolutely. Most of the best ones were, photographer generated ideas. Yeah.
And those used to be, I think, harder to get done. And now the newsroom itself is more receptive.
Right.
So maybe we wrap up with this. Do you guys miss having a loop around your neck and hunching over a light table, or you're pretty happy with the fact that you can just do this on a?
Don't you always miss some elements of the past? I mean,
Do you still have your Schneider loop?
I do.
So do I.
Is it a Schneider loop? I like it. Yeah, it's engraved. Yeah, I have that. What I miss about that, and what we try to replicate in other ways, is that and I'll go back to the standing around the darkroom, where as the prints come up and the conversations of the day, and people leaning over you and go, oh, you should crop that tighter, or whatever it is, or oh, great picture, that you must seek that feedback, that conversation among colleagues, and so how it's sharing. So sometimes now it's actually happening quite publicly.
Yeah.
So now I share that picture on Instagram early before I've ever turned in the other things or whatever it might be. And my colleagues and even more are commenting right there. So the light table experience of that gather around and comment is actually just expanded to a much broader audience. So
along with the volume of images you're looking at every day. Sure.
The volume,
sure.
yeah. And so I agree with Colin. I mean, this is exciting. This is a great time to be a visual storyteller. And there's so many opportunities.
There's no shortage of stories, that's for sure.
Do you feel a responsibility, given that you are a bridge between both of the generations, to kind of, to some degree, usher or make people understand how it used to be and usher them into, I mean, they're going to do what they're going to do anyway, right?
I think, I think that's one thing about photographers and photojournalists. Again, we've always lived in a changing world, and we've always had to, sort of in some ways struggle to get your job done, whether it's struggling with people or logistics or getting places, or in the old days developing, film in a bathroom, using, so we've always, and then over the years, we've been embracing technology since, the first drum transmitters and the Leafax and all these other machines. So I actually think they're good leaders, and they've always had that challenge, at least people even my age. And so I think they really embrace it. And I think, as much as I like using my Schneider loop as a shot glass now, but, beyond,
It's a great idea.
It is a great idea. But beyond that, I mean, we all miss bits of the old days, but the tools are so much better. And our ability to reach an audience immediately, and our ability to reach an audience worldwide, and literally sometimes millions and millions of people, and not be limited just by, that dead tree thing. I think it's really amazing. And then what the tools allow you to do as a journalist, and bring so many different levels into it. Again, that some of the video our folks do is just stunning, and it's a story that you go, that should be done with moving pictures and sound, that should be done on video. And we'll shoot some stills too, but it's like, it gives you that opportunity to tell the story how it should best be told, and to reach massive audiences. So all that so outweighs, the sort of the art of what we used to have in dark rooms and things like that.
Yeah, I think too. I think the greater role is reminding those that are still doing it, when people are like, but we now have to do this and this. And I was like, okay. Used to be, you would have to leave the scene by 3 or 4 o'clock to get back to drive an hour to get back to develop your film, to do whatever,
to make your
deadline.
Type your
now
caption.
you can stay on the scene and literally send the pictures immediately from the scene and never leave it.
Keep pushing the story.
And keep pushing the story. The cameras now, the digital has the ability to see at far lower light situations than we had with film. So you have all of these tools that are just getting better and better and better. And
it still fascinates me. Every once in a while, I'll be going through online or on print, and I'll see a photograph that was taken in the streets at night, and it strikes me that 10, 15, 20 years, you couldn't do this.
No.
You needed flash where you just see little highlights. Now it's a dark version of daylight, and you can see everything. And I find it amazing that you can do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's also great. I mean, I think it's great really how our industry in general has sort of embraced the tools and has embraced the technology, and I think there was a point in the 90s where it felt like, and I really felt, because I'm not a technology guy, and I made a conscious decision not to do that early on, because I saw so many visual editors getting tied up in the early 90s of what's the new transmitter, how are we going to do this, and everybody's involved and worried about the cameras and this and that, and I'm like, whoa, we're not talking about journalism, we're not talking about the stories. And so I'm sort of like, maybe that's my excuse for not being a tech guy, but I've always wanted to try to sort of focus on the journalism, and the other stuff we'll have some experts out there and we'll figure it out, but it's all about the story we're telling through our lenses, and again, whatever the computer behind it or the film behind it or the chip is, it's really about that photographer, that visual journalist, and the story that they can tell because of their skills and what they bring to the table. And I think that's the most important part.
Very, very good. Colin, Nancy, thank you both for joining us. Terrific talking with you guys today.
Thank you. It's a
Thank
pleasure.
you. Enjoyed it.
We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we're going to be speaking with Michael Williamson and MaryAnne Golon.
We hope you're enjoying this edition of the B&H Photography Podcast. Send us a tweet at BHPhotoVideo, #BHPhotoPodcast.
So to build on what Ms. Golon said, I completely agree with everything she said except for that part about photography. If you are interviewing me and her, so much of our editor photographer is cosmic and spiritual and concept. We don't spend a lot of time on the light table editing, cropping film, because the way we discuss it and have an understanding at first, we don't have to do a lot of that. In other words, we build houses. We don't sweep up the nails afterwards. Yeah. You know?
Wow.
So questions about what's it like to be at 9 hours at an editing table with Michael, that's not what we do. We spend 3 hours at dinners talking high concepts about what are we trying to say and how can we do it visually with a non-visual story. So we're not nuts and bolts. She's my rabbi.
And he's not Jewish.
I hope you're recording this. For those of you who are just joining us, we were with Michael Williamson, double Pulitzer Prize winner photographer all over the planet, very well accomplished, and MaryAnne Golon, Washington Post director of photography. Nice to see you again. This is going to be about relationships between a photographer and an editor. And John, you want to get into that a little bit, or?
Well, let's just start with how you guys met. Did you hire him at the Washington Post?
This is what's so
who's
funny.
first?
Now,
Okay.
Michael was a good friend of Eddie's. And so Michael was a fixture up here at the workshop as a team leader and had been teaching for many years. So we had become friends from work.
This is back around when? How far back is this now? Just curious.
15 years ago or so.
Okay.
At least.
Okay.
Yeah, but we physically closely met here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because I never hired Michael. Michael was at the Washington Post when I arrived at the Washington Post, and he had been a staff photographer at other publications before the Washington Post.
Okay.
But I couldn't work with him because he was a staff photographer. So like so many of the relationships that have been born and built at Eddie's workshop, Michael's and mine was initially a professional friendship. And then, much to both of our surprises, 4.5 years ago, I was offered the position at the Washington Post where he was. And it was a great relief to me when he called me immediately and said, hallelujah, instead of, oh my God.
And what was part of the draw to go to the Washington Post, the staff that was there?
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, it was a Pulitzer Prize-winning staff, and there's a lot of wonderful photographers there. But I had left from Time Magazine, being a news photography editor for more than, I told you guys, 24 years, that I had taken 4 years off. And when I say 4 years off, I mean off from daily news. So I had been doing workshops. I curated Look 3, the Festival of the Photograph in Charlottesville, Virginia. I did a whole bunch of different things. I did 2 books. I was busy during that time. But when this opportunity came along, it was a fantastic opportunity because I knew Michael was there. I knew there was a lot of talent there. And I thought, wow, it's sort of like getting back in the saddle again.
Can you talk a little bit more about the dinners, the 3-hour dinners that create a concept, and maybe give us an example of a story that was born over a dinner?
Yeah, essentially, you're talking concepts. This is for news. It's not like we're coming up with an ad campaign. So what does a concept consist of?
Well, I think Michael was up for a third Pulitzer 2 years ago for a series of stories that he did around the country on the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, which replaced food stamps. And Michael and Eli Saslow, one of our most talented writers, went around to a bunch of different places to explore how SNAP differed from food stamps. And Michael has this long history of covering poverty, but also people who struggle, people who have food insecurity, et cetera. But the idea is, as Michael said, and then I'm going to turn it over to him, but when we started talking about this was, you have a card, it's like a credit card. That's what SNAP is given to you as. And his challenge, as it were, was, what if you had the card and now the card has less on it than it did before? That's not very visual, right? So we started talking about all the different ways that he could get at how to show what that means. So, Michael.
I'm actually going to back up 2 years before that when we had our first dinner when she was hired. That was the old 4-hour, $200 steak dinner. Remember that? She paid. Oh, I knew this was going to work out. But it was a love fest in that, man, am I lucky you took the job. And she's like, man, am I lucky you work here. Like, we could be each other's psychological right-hand man. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we can do that. So,
nice feeling. Right?
Because the culture of newspapers and magazine were quite a bit different. And the imagery's the same and all that, but I think the Post was acknowledging that it needed to go a little less old school and more, I hate this term, but it's just the best way to cut to it, magazine-y. A little more fluid, a little more, I don't even mean artistic, I just mean
conceptual.
Yeah. And so I needed to grow. And boy, did I get lucky. I mean, and the way MaryAnne shaped the difference in the way I shot was not through micromanaging, but saying, open it up, let it go, quit cropping, let it be. If it's a big, dark, scary sky, it's bigger and darker if you go wider. And the little church that's threatening is smaller. Like I was trying to rule of thirds, keep it tight. And she was like, let it go. And that is harder to teach somebody to let go than it is to teach them to work 9 to 5 and, dig the ditch. It's harder to conceptualize what you could do with a really good ditch than to dig one. So the fact that we cosmically got along so well was great. So when you do cut to the food stamp story, I consistently get these crazy stories where they go, oh, Michael, we got a problem. It's not visual. It's over. It's not happening anymore. The people are gone.
There's nothing to see.
The few that are left aren't cooperative, but knock yourself out, bro. Go for it. I remember I did a story. It was the 100th anniversary of a lynching on an old bridge. Now, the creek's gone. The bridge is gone. The town's gone. There is a bridge there, but it's just a cement overpass. But make it look ominous and a sense of history in which we feel the pain of it's a concrete overpass. Yeah, but you do that Williamson thing, which we still don't know what that is, but apparently it means something from nothing.
Was that an assignment that you were involved in? No, okay.
No. But it was an example of
That's
how...
not something I do to know.
It was an example of segueing to food stamps, of having a bit of a track record of getting a lot of stories that didn't immediately scream visually easy. And like she said, it's a card. It's not even like you have a handful of food stamps and there's less. Now what? It's a card that just... So we had to really brainstorm 5 different states, 5 different circumstances in which people's lives would be negatively affected by less food. Everything was on the table in terms of how would you show that, not the least of which get the right people to represent that story and not be redundant. So having somebody of superior intellect to just think outside the box and inside the box at the same time and play to what I actually like is a challenge. I love it when it's so non-visual, they're expecting almost nothing. It's easier to work because you're not pressured by, when you go to a famine, there's stuff there. You'll get something. But when you go to a historic site and nothing's there, it's really about your ability to pull a rabbit out of a hat. And the fact that she believes in me, you can't believe how much you do better when you think somebody believes in you and has your back. And that's the hardest thing to explain about our relationship is just knowing that I can call after 3 days and say, I'm at a wall, but I'm feeling it. Stay 2 days. Just do your thing. We're not putting up, I think too many bosses want to control the outcome. And what she wants to do is let the creative process flow fluidly with little hints of where it could go to successfully work with the story.
Now, MaryAnne, will you do that with the same approach with another photographer?
No, I mean, I think what we were talking about, I've been talking about, Michael, with my lovely colleagues here, that as a photography editor, your relationship's different with each photographer. I was saying that if I was looking for somebody to do an assignment, I might say, these 2 photographers are incredibly talented and I love both of them, but one of them is going to be way better for this assignment than the other. And that's when you get into the cosmic spiritual part. I know that you go on a story like that and it's 5 places. So you're going to think of it as 5 fingers on your hand, right? Because you're going to know it has to look like a hand when you're done with it because you think that way. Do you see what I mean? Mm-hmm. It's not about his visual talent. It's the way he thinks. And also it's as you like to say, my people, the people that move you, that motivate you to keep doing this work after all the years that you've been a photojournalist. And so he immediately connects with people in these circumstances. And when you think nobody could possibly get in somewhere, Michael's not only in there, he's laying on the floor in the living room, so getting a nice angle on something. But in this particular story, it was also very fun because when he'd come back, we saw each other for like a mid-story dinner, and he had just gotten back and he just like whipped his camera over, which he had never done before, and goes, look at this, look at this, look at this. And he was showing me on the back of his camera something that had really excited him that he shot the day before. And I said, I knew you were going to kill this, And he told me at the end of the story that was the point at which he felt like, I know I can finish it. It's really about being a supporter, and as he said, having his back, if he's somewhere and he said, I've been here 3 days, but I'm just starting to feel it. I'll say, stay longer, to get what it is that you need, to make it feel like he's got the right support too. Because I think a lot of what we're losing in the current environment of photography, because Michael and I are not spring chickens, is this sort of relationship where you can have an understanding of the needs on both sides. He knows that we need an A1 photo. He knows that we need enough pictures to fill a gallery, not just 2 pages on the inside of the newspaper. I know that he knows these things, and we can work together with one another to develop it. And we already trusted each other before we worked together. So that was really excellent because we didn't have to get through a lot of the push-pull that I've had to go through with other photographers, for instance, even photographers who work at the Post, because you don't really know each other, so you have to kind of find your way. And I think we just zipped right past all that.
Well, you'll remember this. You watch your head bob here. In our first year, I had 5 or 6 major projects where I turned in between 30 and 80 pictures. And I had in the back of my head the probable A1, photo 47. But I didn't tell her. And she would go through the take 5 times in a row. The A1 photo she picked, I go, this is creepy, because that was the one I had as you picking A1. Remember how we had that ridiculous run? It was almost spooky, because I didn't put it at the front. I didn't put it in a batch of favorites. It was just in there.
It's just mind meld,
Or was it just the best photo?
No, because it was some of it was nuance and layering. The story wasn't even written, and it turned out that was the best photo to go to the story that neither one of us knew.
Right.
But we talk about too, I think this is the other thing that's good about working with Michael is that we talk about how to bring a story alive, because a lot of times what I think is the place that photography can really elevate when you're doing journalism, because come on guys, journalism is everything together. It's headline, it's caption, it's voice of the photographer, it's voice of the writer. And I think what the best combination is that we come up with, and Michael is a master at it, is to hug the story on both sides tight enough to keep it together without having it be literal. Just not, that you get the feeling of something without it being exactly, I guess the best way to describe it is to say what I hate the most is when an editor says, but this guy's in the lead. And I say, I don't care if that guy's in the lead. That guy can be this big on the inside because this is the lead photo. And the reason is because we're setting a tone for the story. We're setting a tone, and this is the image that you'll dive into this story on. And if you want to see what that guy looks like, you can see him later. You can see him on the jump pages in the print product, or you can see him in the gallery, or we'll make sure we get him in there. But just because the opening line is from a certain person doesn't mean that the first image you see has to be that person, and I think that's the difference between like being literal and being more sort of conceptual. And so when you said at the very beginning, Alan, we're not talking about advertising here, we're talking about journalism. Our big projects at the Washington Post, we refer to our big projects as enterprise. A lot of different places refer to it in different ways, but the Washington Post enterprise is our original journalism. It's not coming from the wires. It's not coming from anywhere but our collective professionalism, and those are the stories that Michael's working on most of the time. So we're looking at projects over the course of the year, or things that we could revisit in a first take, second take, third take, where you're thinking long term about what the packaging of the whole project is going to be, and also what's the meaning, the visual meaning that you're trying to get out of that selection of photographs or that assignment. And Michael's really, really good at it.
Did you see where she said it hugs the story, but not necessarily just illustrating point by point by point everybody mentioned? One of the things that I love about doing these projects is I'm like the Americana backroads freak. So I want to go into the little Alabama town, to the bars and the pool halls. Even though the story is completely unrelated, it's about a drug problem. The reporter doesn't spend a lot of time about the nature of the town or what it's like. It goes kind of right to the people and the problem. But I always give them that Williamson town pictures stuff because for me, I'm adding to the story. Here's this place. Here's where it is. It's in the hills. It's dark. Half the buildings are boarded up. Even the story we just did on a Trump supporter that felt defeated by the economy. A third of the photos I turned in was the abandoned town that she drives through every day, and it reminds her of failure. It was my attempt to visually say, this is why she feels so frustrated, angry, and beaten down. Reporter barely mentioned the decrepit, rotting buildings. I added to her story. She only needed one throwaway line about the battered downtown because she knew I was going to photograph it. And MaryAnne's good about, I don't care if they don't mention downtown. This could be the lead. Remember the food stamp story? Mm-hmm. One of the strongest photos was a cheesy little sad used car lot. Because I made a separate expanded point that when people ran out of money, they sold their cars and now they were on foot and they were walking to these food banks. Completely unrelated to food stamps, except it was one of the dominoes that falls when poverty kicks in your door. And it was strictly visual. None of that was mentioned in the story. And she lets me run with it. I mean, sometimes I am so far away from the original story.
Sometimes I have to yank it back.
It's like, the lunar eclipse is not really related. So, nice try, Michael.
Well, in that story, for example, when will you first show her some images?
I send a big loose take, and then she tears it apart. I have nothing to say after that.
After you're done with, let's say, the first town you went to?
I give good, solid pictures from each thing I shoot, but I let the doctor do the surgery.
Okay.
Do you send everything you've shot?
Every scene, not every frame, because I don't send junk. She doesn't have time to look at 4,000 frames.
Yeah, okay.
But if I've done a person that's in it, you'll get every scene, set piece that I did.
Plenty of choices depending on the need.
She never has to call and say, do you have a wide? Do you have an overall? Do you have a close-up of the guy's face?
Coverage.
I'll give you 3 versions of the important person's face. So you can run it small or wide or jump with it. I do think like an editor in terms of, if I got 3-page spread, they could use this, but not if it's 2.
During the food stamp story, too, I remember I kept trying to get in these water towers. He had been at this one place, and it was near a town that was kind of known for these paired water towers that they had done something funny. They'd written something funny.
It said hot water, cold water.
Yeah. It's on these 2 water towers next to each
twin
other.
water towers.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to include it in this. We did put it in the gallery, but I wanted to include it in the edit of the story because I said, it's all like a little emotional relief, because when you're looking at, you're sympathizing with these people who are in a life of struggle, that when you see something like with the blue sky and the hot water, cold water towels, and I might as well have been speaking Arabic, to my editors. They were like looking at me like I was from another planet. And I said to Michael, that's where you really feel the divide between sort of magazine journalism and newspaper journalism, in that you want it right and you want it factual, but I think there's a lot more air in it, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah,
you know,
sure.
we want to hug the story, as I said, very tightly, not squeeze it to death. So you just feel like, okay, you know, I mean, I used to say a lot of times too that our loyal readers are really smart. You know, that's why they're reading us.
Give
you know,
readers
so
credit,
let's
right?
give them some credit and also challenge them, because I feel like as a professional, a picture professional, a photography professional, working with people like Michael, that even like for me, it makes my heart sing to hear him say that he heard me when I was saying, loosen it up, Michael, get out of your box, you know, like just forget your box and play in the whole yard today. Yeah. You know, like I want you in the whole yard. And he heard me. Right. And the pictures got more open and he started shooting a little looser. And then we, you know, when he came back and we started talking again, he said, I feel energized. I feel like, you know, I've got this new thing going on. And I said, you got a new editor, you know, like you got somebody else to work with than he had been working with, you know, but also he has my back. I've got his back, you know, so you really do feel that sense of camaraderie. That's so important, because in a newsroom, and Michael, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but my experience has been that, you know, photography people have to stick together, because even in the year 2016, and I'm astounded that I'm saying this, especially after 30 years in the business, there's still a lot of people who think the picture should be illustrating the story. Yeah. And so
service department,
these age-old battles about the value of the journalism that is visual journalism. And, you know, you say visual journalism, we use that terminology a lot. And I use visual narrative all the time. It's a visual narrative. We're telling a story here with the pictures. You know, so the story that you're reading and the story that you're seeing can run parallel to each other without even intersecting. And
but we've made headway there.
We have.
Because we'll get a killer portrait and she'll make sure we get information in a good quote and put a full quote in the caption. Not only does it end up in the story, I had 2 stories where they had to give Michael Williamson contributed to this report because all the best quotes I gave to the reporter. And that really helps the credibility that we're not competing here, people. I just found a better person. And sometimes the person's not even in the story except for that caption. I will say one more thing. I know it's an embarrassing love fest, but I've been doing it 35 years, had 2 teenage children, an extremely busy life, and friends on Facebook and relatives said something in the last few years that's been very interesting. You know, 2 Pulitzers, 8 books. I've had a great life. They'd say, what do you got better? I mean, how did you get better after 30? Something's going on with you, Williamson. You noticeably improved. Now, part of that is a baseline concept that I think you should always be growing. I mean, I really do see photographers who are exactly as good or not good as they were 10 years ago. But this goes, and I always say, I know the day and time. The 4 hours take dinner when she let me out of the puppy cage at the homeless dog shelter. I'm still on a leash. It's just 400 miles long.
Well, have you ever barked back at the owner and fought for a photo that maybe wasn't going to be included?
Like I said, this love fest is going to be sickening. I've never had a major disagreement with MaryAnne over a photo.
I'm going to ask a flip question, Mary. You obviously deal with more photographers, okay, than Michael, okay? And what percentage of the photographers, I'm not going to ask how many, but what percentage of the photographers that you deal with on a regular basis, and there's a number of them, do you have the same kind of connection that
very few. No, it's a very few. I have to tell you, I mean, Michael and I have a very professional relationship, but we're also friends. And I think we're friends first. And we were friends first before we started working together. And I think that changes the whole dynamic because there's a mutual respect. I knew his work. He knew my work. And we just, it's very unusual. Because I've walked, and I'm sure Michael can tell you similar stories, but I've walked in this barn, at this workshop, amongst legends in the business that I've never edited with. I've never signed them. I've never sat down with them and gone over their work together with them, but I respect them and they respect me. And I have a feeling that there's a handful of those people that I would love to work with the way that I work with Michael. But this was serendipity. That we ended up at the same newspaper is like almost, ungodly. But that said, I do tend to be a person who wants to connect with the photographer, to be able to have a relationship that I think always, invariably, nets better work out of both of us by going farther, digging deeper, asking questions about what they're doing. I think this workshop's a lot of it. Michael's been a team leader here, and his kids will say, he can really get to the heart of you. And I think as a teacher, I'm always saying that the best photography is coming from the inside of you. So if you're not willing to let me see the inside of you, I'll never be able to help you. I'm willing to reveal my weaknesses if you'll reveal yours, and we can strengthen each other, if that makes sense.
I just want to thank you for answering the question that I didn't ask yet. And that was, is there a difference between the relationship between an editor in journalism and a photographer, and say an editor in advertising and a photographer? And the way you have been discussing concept and illustrating and giving a narrative, okay? You basically answered it, and there really isn't any, okay? There's some details that are different, but the creative thing can be the same, and that's just kind of neat to
Well, I think
hear.
visual narrative to me is a universal language that people respond to no matter what the words are on it. So I think, in advertising, a lot of times you need the combination of the image and the words to sell, whatever it is you're trying to sell. And kind of on the granular level of photojournalism that Michael Williamson produces, and this sort of level of real, absolutely uniquely true kind of human level that photojournalism operates on, you don't need any words. If you do build a picture story properly, and you sort of introduce an idea and introduce a character and walk somebody through 10 frames, 12 frames, I could interview you. I could say, here, I'm going to show you a story. I'm not going to speak. I'm just going to show you the story. And I'll say, okay, what's the story about? And you'll be able to tell me.
The other thing, I think it's a little bit parallel to what she said about universal translation, is a whole nother thing we haven't talked about, because we've been so talking about creativity and that we are in the same vibe. And that's another area that's so foundationally part of our belief. And that's this. I'm not trying to show off my cool photography. I'm not trying to shove my eye candy down your throat. It may look real pretty. There's content in there, homie. And she gets where I'm dressing up content to make it accessible. But I never forget who I'm actually working for.
That's a great point.
The reader. It's not about me. And this is when I do portfolio critiques. The meanest thing that I ever heard was from another leader who said, well, Jeremy, I've learned a lot about you, but nothing about your subject. That was pretty mean, but we are seeing that navel-staring stuff in which they forget who they're working for. MaryAnne always understands there's a story that we are sending out to millions of people that has to ride this strange wave of being simply enough explained that a regular person will get it, and yet high enough in that, somebody at the White House will go, wow, we need to do something about those batteries in the cell phones. And so I'm working for you. You don't have to care about what my favorite thing is. Now, I'll make you like my Route 66 pictures because they'll be so deliciously fun that you'll want to go there. So I'm doing social engineering, but I'm not doing lobbying. I'm offering you water on a hot day, and that water will be good for you. And MaryAnne is always, we're trying to service this story. We're not trying to show Michael's best photos. The strangest.
Good stuff. Thank you to Nancy, Colin, Michael, and MaryAnne, as well as to Alyssa Adams and Miriam Evers of the Eddie Adams Workshop, which is sponsored by Nikon with support from B&H. As always, thanks to John Harris and Jason Tables, and to our listeners whose feedback and comments help guide our show. We can be reached on Twitter and Instagram with the hashtag BHPhotoPodcast, or feel free to email us at podcast@bhphoto.com. My name is Alan Weitz, and as always, thank you so much for joining us today.